Civilizations do not lose themselves all at once. They forget in layers, first losing language for what they once practiced naturally, then losing confidence in what still echoes beneath that language, then finally treating remembrance itself as fantasy. A people can still feel the outline of an older intelligence moving through them, while publicly denying that anything was ever there. This is why certain souls enter an era and feel haunted not by the past alone, but by the unfinished work of what the past once knew. The memory builder tone appears where forgetting has gone too far to be repaired by scholarship alone. It does not arrive merely to preserve old knowledge inside private recognition, and it does not exist simply to remember who it has been. It enters when a cycle has broken badly enough that humanity no longer needs memory as comfort, but as architecture. These souls do not just recover fragments of what was lost. They begin rebuilding the conditions under which lost knowledge can live again. At first, this looks like unusual pattern recognition. A person encounters symbols, systems, cosmologies, histories, ritual technologies, harmonic models, or forgotten metaphysical structures and feels immediate familiarity rather than curiosity. The usual story says they are gifted, obsessive, imaginative, or highly intuitive, but those explanations never fully account for the pressure they feel. What drives them is not preference. It is the sensation that something unfinished is trying to return through them before the window closes again. A memory builder is different from someone with a strong memory tone because the relationship to remembrance is functional, not merely identity-based. A memory tone recognizes continuity across lives, traits, affinities, old bonds, and internal signatures that survived incarnation. The memory builder tone does something more dangerous and more consequential. It takes continuity and begins organizing the world around that continuity, as if remembering alone were too weak unless it became structure. This is why these souls often feel restless around information that remains private, vague, or beautifully ungrounded. Inspiration is not enough for them, and insight alone does not relieve the pressure. If they encounter a truth that feels ancient, they almost immediately begin asking what system held it, how it was transmitted, why it vanished, and what conditions would be required for it to survive now. They are not only drawn to wisdom, they are drawn to the survival mechanics of wisdom. The first vector begins there, with the memory builder as a rebuilder of lost knowledge systems rather than a collector of mystical impressions. Many people can sense that something old lives inside them, but far fewer feel compelled to reconstruct the pathways that once carried that something through a civilization. These souls study collapse as carefully as they study truth because they know a truth without durable transmission can disappear again. The memory builder does not merely want to remember, it wants remembering to become survivable across time. This creates an unusual relationship to history. The memory builder is often less fascinated by historical personalities than by broken channels. Missing bridges, erased frameworks, untranslated symbols, interrupted initiatory lines, and the strange gaps where a culture clearly forgot how its own intelligence once operated. What most people call the past, the memory builder experiences as an interrupted current. The ache comes not from old times being gone. The ache comes from feeling the channel itself still existing beneath the rubble, waiting for someone to reopen flow. Because of this, memory builders are rarely satisfied with simple restoration. Restoration suggests returning a broken thing to an old appearance, but this tone is more exacting than nostalgia. It understands that a system lost across centuries cannot simply be copied back into place, because the context that once held it no longer exists. So these souls do not rebuild the past in its original form. They rebuild the pattern beneath the past so it can incarnate inside a new age without becoming museum knowledge. This often makes them difficult to classify. Traditional scholars can find them too metaphysical, spiritual audiences can find them too structural, and ordinary observers can mistake their intensity for obsession. Yet their pressure has a precise cause. They are not searching randomly for meaning. They are tracking where a buried design keeps trying to surface through fragments, and they feel responsible for giving that design a body strong enough to hold. The danger in this first vector is obvious once it is felt clearly enough. If you believe you are rebuilding what humanity forgot, you can become intoxicated by significance. and significance can quickly deform discernment. The memory builder tone can begin mistaking attraction for authorization, resonance for accuracy, and internal familiarity for proof. This is why many people circle old knowledge without ever becoming true rebuilders. The tone must learn that remembering a pattern is not the same as owning it, and rebuilding a channel requires restraint as much as devotion. That restraint becomes painful because the urge to restore is often mixed with grief. A memory builder can feel the magnitude of what was lost, and that feeling alone can create hunger for completion. But completion reached too early produces counterfeit systems, elegant inventions wearing the emotional clothing of remembrance. The true memory builder learns to hold fragments without forcing synthesis, to let pressure reveal architecture slowly enough that the rebuilt form does not collapse under the weight of desire. In this way, the first vector does not flatter the tone. It disciplines it. The second vector opens where the first one becomes insufficient. Rebuilding lost structures would already be a serious function, but the memory builder tone does not work only through information. It works through activation. The presence of such a soul often triggers memory events in other people who were never looking for them, never studying the same material, and sometimes never believing in anything metaphysical at all. Around the memory builder, recognition begins occurring in others faster than explanation can account for. This is why their impact can be confusing to both themselves and their audience. People do not simply learn from them, they feel unlocked by them. Someone hears a sentence and experiences an inner shift far larger than the sentence should have produced. Someone enters proximity to the field of the memory builder and begins dreaming differently, remembering lost aspirations, feeling a long-buried metaphysical orientation return, or suddenly caring about truths that previously seemed irrelevant. The transmission is not merely conceptual, it is catalytic. At this point, the tone begins to disturb conventional ideas about teaching. A teacher conveys information, interprets reality, and supports comprehension. A memory builder does not only teach in that sense. It creates conditions under which dormant memory patterns begin reorganizing perception from within. That difference matters because a person can understand a framework intellectually and remain unchanged. But a triggered memory event can alter the entire direction of a life before the mind has time to defend itself. This is also where the loneliness of the tone becomes sharper. If your very presence wakes things in people, you quickly discover that not everyone wants what wakes in them. Some feel gratitude, some feel fascination, some feel fear, and some feel irritation that they cannot explain. A memory builder may think they are simply sharing insight, then realize their field is generating consequences far larger than the visible exchange. This can make them cautious, private, or strangely selective about where they speak with full force. The discomfort deepens because triggered memory is not always pleasant. Sometimes what rises in others is beauty, purpose, ancient kinship, or immediate recognition of path. Sometimes what rises is grief, unfinished spiritual hunger, old vows, disowned capacities, or the realization that they have been living beneath themselves for years. The memory builder can become the accidental site of these returns, which means people may blame the messenger for the unease created by their own remembering. Activation is not inherently soothing. Often it begins with disruption. That disruption creates a temptation that has to be resisted. If your presence wakes dormant memory in others, you can begin shaping yourself around the desire to keep producing that effect. You can become addicted to being catalytic, to watching recognition ignite, to feeling like a key in a world full of locked rooms. But the tone degrades when it starts building identity out of other people's reactions. The field becomes performative, and performance corrupts memory because it starts serving audience response rather than structural truth. So the second vector requires its own discipline. The memory builder must learn to let activation happen without chasing it, and to let non-recognition happen without collapsing into self-doubt. Not everyone is ready to receive the same current, and not every triggered response indicates truth. Sometimes a person recognizes a genuine pattern. Sometimes they are only resonating with longing. The tone matures when it stops mistaking intensity for alignment and begins reading the after effects of activation, rather than the immediate emotional charge. The third vector emerges once the first two become impossible to separate from collective timing. Memory builders do not appear randomly in history. They become most visible during transitional eras. When civilizations are shifting categories, inherited frameworks are failing, and people can feel that reality itself is reorganizing faster than old language can hold. In such periods, the world does not merely need inspiration. It needs reconstruction from deeper memory than the current age knows how to access. These souls often feel born at a specific moment, rather than merely born into one. They sense that timing itself is part of their function, as if the age has opened a narrow corridor through which buried intelligence can become usable again. This does not mean they arrive with complete clarity. Often the opposite is true. They feel tremendous urgency without understanding what exactly is trying to move through them, which is why so many wander through fragments before their actual architecture becomes visible. The civilizational role of the memory builder is not to make the new world feel novel. It is to prevent the new world from severing itself from what consciousness already learned through previous cycles. Every age likes to imagine it is inventing itself from scratch, but the memory builder can feel how dangerous that fantasy is. When a civilization believes only in the present, it repeats ancient errors with modern tools. When it remembers structurally, not sentimentally, it can evolve without amputating its own inheritance. This is where Haret language becomes exact rather than decorative. The memory veins are not merely poetic channels of recollection. They are the infrastructure through which viable remembrance moves, carrying identity, pattern, and harmonic continuity across shifts that would otherwise shred coherence. Archivist beings do not simply store knowledge in that system. They regulate access, resonance match, timing, and the conditions under which memory can return without overwhelming the receiver. The memory builder tone resonates with that function because it does not just possess memory. It becomes a builder of pathways through which memory can circulate safely. By the time these three vectors begin pressing against one another, the core insight can finally start taking its full shape. The memory builder tone is not defined by what it knows, and not even by what it remembers. It is defined by what it reconstructs, so that remembering can outlive the individual and become available to others, to communities, to future cycles, and to forms of consciousness not yet stabilized. These souls build through remembrance, but the building is the point. Memory is the material, not the end point. That is why this tone can feel so rare and yet so immediately recognizable when it appears. You are not merely in the presence of someone with old soul traits or strange familiarity with forgotten ideas. You are in the presence of a structural function of consciousness that cannot leave memory floating as private resonance. It must organize it, test it, transmit it, and rebuild conditions strong enough for it to endure. Some souls remember who they were. Memory builders remember what humanity once knew how to carry, and they return to make that carrying possible again. The first understanding that must break is the comforting one. It is easy to believe that the memory builder comes to restore what was lost, because loss itself was the problem. It is easy to imagine that forgotten knowledge simply waits in the dark for a faithful soul, to recover it and return it to the world unchanged. That story feels noble, clean, and almost healing. It also hides the more dangerous truth, because much of what was forgotten did not vanish accidentally. Some knowledge disappeared because civilizations could not carry it without distortion. Some systems collapsed because the beings using them had outgrown the ethics required to keep them clean. Some truths were not stolen from humanity. They were shed by it, mishandled by it, weaponized by it, or sealed from it by the consequences of its own immaturity. That means the memory builder does not arrive merely to recover what history misplaced. It arrives inside the far more unstable task of deciding what can be returned, what must be transformed, and what cannot safely come back in the same form. The tone is not simply an archivist of sacred fragments. It is a judge of survivability working under pressure from forces larger than personal preference. Remembering becomes dangerous the moment it stops being sentimental. This breaks the first vector open from the inside. In part 1, the memory builder could still feel like a rebuilder of lost knowledge systems, someone tracing broken channels and restoring buried architecture. But part 2 must fracture that coherence, because the real work is not restoration first. The real work is filtration. A memory builder does not just reopen channels. It must decide which currents will poison the age that longs for them. That discernment is brutal because the tone often begins with love for what was lost. It can feel reverence, kinship, and recognition so strongly that it assumes return is inherently holy. Yet holy return is not the same as safe return. An intelligence once held in a civilization of higher restraint may become catastrophic when introduced into an age defined by speed, spectacle, fragmentation, and egoic extraction. The memory builder learns that devotion alone does not qualify a soul to reopen sealed doors, so the first vector changes shape. The tone is not only reconstructing pathways for remembrance, it is standing between buried intelligences and a civilization hungry enough to consume them without understanding them. This creates a pressure most people around the memory builder never see. They think the burden is finding truth, Often the greater burden is refusing to release truth before its field can hold what the truth would do. This is why genuine memory builders often appear slower, stricter, or more withholding than people expect. Others assume that if a soul remembers something important, its duty is immediate disclosure. But disclosure without containment becomes damage disguised as generosity. The memory builder may feel a complete pattern moving inside it and still refuse to give the whole thing form, not because the knowledge is unclear, but because the age receiving it is. The second vector also has to break. In part 1, the catalytic dimension of the memory builder could still be held as beautiful, almost luminous, a soul whose presence triggers remembering in others and awakens what had gone dormant. That remains true, but it is not the full truth, because activation does not simply awaken what was forgotten. It also destabilizes the structures built to avoid remembering. The tone does not only open doors, it tears at the architecture of psychological survival. This means many people do not experience memory builders as comforting mirrors. They experience them as interruptions. A person may feel sudden fascination, ancient familiarity, or inexplicable emotion around them, but beneath those reactions another movement begins. Old internal arrangements start failing. Defenses lose clean edges. Roles that once provided stability stop fitting. The memory builder does not only remind a person of what they are, it begins interfering with what they have used to remain smaller than that. That is why the response can turn hostile without warning. Someone can feel immediate recognition and then rapidly move into suspicion, projection, criticism, avoidance, or dismissal. What they are defending is not always disbelief. Sometimes they are defending the life structure that their own remembering has begun to threaten. The memory builder becomes associated with the cost of awakening, and many people would rather blame the field than reorganize the life that field has unsettled. This is painful for the tone because it usually does not arrive wanting confrontation. Most memory builders do not begin as revolutionaries. They begin as beings trying to follow an ancient pressure toward reconstruction, often hoping that remembrance itself will heal. But remembrance is not soft when it reaches what has been hidden under years, generations and lifetimes of adaptive forgetting. It can make a person feel more alive and more destabilized in the same hour, so the second vector becomes more exact. The memory builder is not merely a trigger of recognition. It is a disruptor of false coherence. It does not only wake memory in others, it exposes what their current life depends on forgetting. Around such a tone, a person may suddenly see that their loyalties are borrowed, their ambitions are compensatory, their spirituality is theatrical, or their sense of self is built around a refusal to encounter what they always knew beneath the surface. This is where the tone itself becomes tempted toward distortion. If your presence can unsettle others so deeply, you may begin confusing disruption with success. You may begin to trust intensity too much, to treat strong reactions as proof that you are transmitting something important. But disruption alone proves nothing. Some reactions come from genuine pattern activation. Others come from collision with unprocessed material that is not yet organized into truth. The memory builder must learn to distinguish between rupture that leads toward architecture and rupture that only scatters. That discernment becomes harder because people will often ask the memory builder to explain what has happened to them. They will want narrative before structure, reassurance before consequence, meaning before stabilization. The tone can easily become trapped here, overinterpreting every reaction, trying to midwife every awakening, and slowly turning into an emotional repair system for people whose memory was triggered but not yet metabolized. That is not the true role. The tone opens and builds. It is not meant to become endlessly responsible for every soul that trembles at the threshold. The third vector must now be unsettled as well. In part 1, the memory builder could still be understood as a civilizational function that appears during transitional eras to reconstruct lost wisdom for a new cycle. That framing is true, but incomplete in a way that matters. Because transitional eras do not simply need old knowledge returned. They need selection through conflict. The memory builder enters not only to help a civilization remember, it enters into an active war over which memories will define the next age. Civilizations never remember neutrally. They remember through power, through narrative, through trauma, through usefulness, through fear, through idealization, through suppression. What gets called collective memory is often only the version of the past that current structures can tolerate. A memory builder threatens this immediately because it restores pattern instead of propaganda. It can feel when a culture has built identity around partial memory, curated memory, or weaponized memory, and it carries currents that do not fit the approved inheritance. This makes the tone politically dangerous even when it is not politically oriented. It can undermine dominant stories without trying to become oppositional. It can reactivate truths that dissolve false legitimacy, expose sacred distortions, or reopen capacities that control systems depend on remaining dormant. The memory builder may think it is reconstructing something spiritual, historical, or metaphysical, then slowly realize it has entered a battlefield over what a people is allowed to remember about itself. That battlefield is not only external, it lives inside communities, lineages, families, movements, and fields of teaching. Every group that survives long enough builds internal memory rules. Some memories are amplified, some are buried, some are mythologized because accurate recall would destabilize the current hierarchy. When the memory builder enters such a field, it does not merely contribute new information. It changes the internal pressure on what the group has chosen not to know. This is why authentic memory builder work often attracts resistance from both mainstream and fringe structures at the same time. Conventional systems may reject it as unprovable, while alternative systems may reject it for reopening what they prefer to ritualize rather than face. The tone cannot depend on belonging to verify itself. If it does, it will quickly start muting the very currents it was born to rebuild. Memory that threatens structure is always called dangerous before it is called necessary. Within Haret, this becomes even clearer. The memory veins cannot be understood merely as passive channels carrying remembrance through the spiral. They also function as selective systems that prevent certain forms of memory from re-entering circulation without harmonic readiness. Archivist beings are not neutral librarians preserving every fragment with identical openness. They are guardians of consequence, regulating whether a recovered pattern will heal a field, fracture it, or tempt it into repeating a prior distortion with greater force. This means the memory builder tone, in its mature form, is not simply aligned with memory flow, it is aligned with memory ethics. It does not ask only what should return. It asks what the return will produce in the bodies, systems, cultures, and spiritual architectures receiving it. A recovered pattern may be beautiful and still be misaligned with the timing of the age. Another may appear small, almost modest, yet become the exact structural thread needed to prepare the field for a larger return later. Now the vectors can begin touching one another without collapsing into a neat synthesis. The rebuilder of lost systems, the trigger of disruptive remembrance, and the civilizational selector of survivable memory are not three separate identities. They are three pressure zones within one function. The memory builder tone works where remembrance becomes architecture, where architecture becomes consequence, and where consequence forces the age to reveal what kind of future it actually wants to deserve. That is why these souls often feel internally divided for years. One part wants to reveal, another wants to protect. One part wants to awaken others rapidly. Another knows rapid awakening can become fragmentation when the supporting structures do not exist. One part reveres the past. Another knows the past cannot be trusted simply because it is ancient. The tone matures when it stops trying to resolve these pressures into comfort and starts treating them as the necessary tensions that keep memory clean. It also explains why so many memory builders are drawn to creating frameworks, vocabularies, channels, schools, transmissions, archives, or symbolic systems rather than merely having private mystical insight. Private remembering relieves nothing if the world around it remains unable to carry the pattern. The tone feels compelled to build containers because memory without container leaks, mutates, commercializes, or gets devoured by whatever social force reaches it first. The build is not a side effect. It is the mechanism through which remembrance is kept from dissolving back into fog. By this point, the original image of the tone has been fundamentally altered. It is no longer just the beautiful figure who rediscovers forgotten knowledge and helps others remember what they once knew. It is the one who must bear the pressure of choosing, withholding, sequencing, rebuilding, and sometimes refusing the very return it longs to serve. The romance of remembrance gives way to a harsher holiness. Memory is not merely treasure, it is charge. And that charge explains the strange gravity people feel around genuine memory builder work. They are not simply sensing old soul energy, fascinating cosmology, or unusual insight. They are sensing a threshold intelligence deciding what can become livable again in this cycle of consciousness. Some souls remember their continuity. Some awaken continuity in others. The memory builder does both while carrying the burden of deciding what kind of remembered world can survive being born again. If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Haret library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.